Hello guys, welcome to our first video. I'm going to be putting out a series of videos over the next while, bringing some information about custom software, app development, and so on, which in this day and age you would think would be readily available and understood by the masses, but unfortunately it is not. Building software and building apps is something that is taboo to many people, and it is my goal to slowly and with multiple videos uh, share that information and help demystify the entire concept of building software. And hopefully, you can walk away with a couple of solid points and a better understanding of how software is built. So today we're going to look at something interesting called, and the topic is utilizing software to automate operations. So utilizing software to automate operations, our goal here is going to be uh, we're going to cover a specific type of customer that approaches us pretty often. This is not your startup. This is not somebody who has the next Facebook or next Twitter idea or next Uber and they're looking to build their app. This is not for you. However, I'm sure there are plenty of things that you'd be able to gain from this video and learn some stuff from it as well. So let's just kind of look quickly at the topics that we're going to cover. The first topic is going to be understanding how really building software or custom software that is really about defining the process, not so much building the software, at least from your perspective. We're going to discuss the love-hate relationship that everyone has with automation. We're going to explore the idea of building a custom system versus using an existing CRM. And CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management, but it's widely used today to refer to any sort of online system that keeps records of your sales, marketing, and so on. We're also going to discuss a hybrid approach that kind of combines existing and custom systems, and then we'll get to the best bang for your buck, which is going to be us discussing when it does make sense to build a custom system. And then finally, if you do come to the conclusion that custom software is the way to go, then how to navigate that path and some tips over there as well. So Joseph Weizenbaum said, the computer programmer is a creator of universes for which he alone is the lawgiver. Joseph was a professor, and he's actually one of the people that uh, is said to be the fathers of AI. Let's read that again. The computer programmer is a creator of universes for which he alone is the lawgiver. No playwright, no stage director, no emperor, however powerful, has ever exercised such absolute authority to arrange a stage or field of battle, and to command such unswervingly dutiful actors or troops. So essentially, what Joseph is saying here is that when a programmer creates a program, he has absolute control over what happens. And that's really the power of software. That's what's made software explode. And that's why tech is so powerful these days, because tech repeats something and does exactly what the boss says. It's like a dog that does everything its owner says, but precisely always 100%. When we look at an animal that does tricks and we're amazed, how the owner can teach it and how it just goes and repeats these things again and again and again, regardless of its circumstance. Well, a computer is the ultimate. The computer program uh, is at the mercy of the computer programmer. So, in a large scale, when we're building systems for organizations, the power of technology and software is that when we create the rules of what's supposed to happen, as long as we cover everything properly, the program will re- repeatedly always give us that same output and that same result. So let's jump right in here and let's explore this first concept of someone who wants to build software. Typically, when people come, and many clients that I've spoken to, they approach and they say, "Oh, I know exactly what I want. I just need you to build it." It's almost never the case. The case is almost always that they know the problems they have, and they also know that software seems to be a good solution, but they don't have the process for which to solve the problems. Because software really just implements a process of some sort, whether it's Google, which is obviously very complex, Uber, or any software in the middle. The only thing the software does is it just does what you ask it to do. So that's the process. So the process is really the part that ultimately is going to dictate what the software does, because the only barrier then is an incompetent programmer. But if you have a program that's doing exactly what the process says and it's properly documented, then the software will always follow the process that you outlined. So software, like we discussed, is just, and I say just, a robot that periodically repeats itself. So all software does is it just says, well, you're going to put first name in here and you hit save. I will always save first name. You want to tell me that first name can't have any numbers and it can only be up to 10 characters? I'll just do that again and again and again and I'll never get tired. So that's really what software is. And that's the really uh, kind of big, grand way of looking at it that encompasses all aspects of software. Most times, people looking to build software are really looking for help creating their process and then building the system to automate it. So, like I mentioned, many times people come and they say, they're looking for a custom system, they're looking for someone to build an app for their business. Business owners typically know their problems really, really well. It's the solution to those problems that they sometimes have a challenge with, and then uh, the need for software is then confused with the need for a process. If your company is growing, then by definition, so are your operations, and therefore your process is changing. So, this is something that's also interesting to note. Many times, companies start off with a very simple, basic process. And as operations grow, there are more people in the organization. More people equals more process needed because now you no longer have all the information in your head. In order to complete one task that's spread across two or three or four people or departments, and all of a sudden the company's in need of a process and software. But the software aspect enables the four or three or two departments or people to work on the same file as an example and do so efficiently. However, if the process is already there and the company is very clear in their operations as to how these different people and departments communicate with one another, then creating the software to replicate that is relatively trivial. However, many times a company, because it grows so rapidly, doesn't necessarily notice how they are in dire need of an improvement to their process, or many times the company has implemented a process and they're doing that process every single day and it's working. However, they don't look at it as a process, so it hasn't been formalized. So person A and person B and person C are working beautifully, and they all get each other, they all understand each other. However, no one has actually documented and formalized this process that they've created out of necessity. Well, for three people, that works. When you have three departments of 30 people, of course it doesn't. And the difference between the 3 and the 30 is a need for documenting the process. When we have a process documented, then creating the software from there is much simpler. Building a custom application for your company never ends unless your company does. So there's this kind of notion where, and you hear this a lot, uh, what I need is really, really simple. All I need you to do is build A, B, and C, and then it's going to solve all my current operational issues, and I'm done. So can you just quote this for me in a flat rate so I can just go build it, so you can go build it, I can go and use it, and then my life is perfect? Well, it's obvious that that's not the case. And of course, if you reflect in your own business the year prior, you didn't need any of that. So think about how many changes have occurred between last year and this year, and then think about the amount of growth that you've experienced between last year and this year. Then think about the amount of growth that you plan to hopefully experience over the next 5 years, and then try to self justify that you don't need to change your systems at all. The good news is that we're talking here all about the process and how it's the process, not the software. The good news is that the world of software development has identified that people are not perfect. Surprise. It's also identified that however process oriented a company is, their process is most likely not perfect enough to be written straight to software. Because even a process that's written for people is by definition going to be more ambiguous and rely on some level on the human judgment. So, for example, when we say put the customer information in the file, there's no need to say put their first name, last name, and their email, which has an at sign and a .com and so on, because they're people. Well, when you deal with software, software for the good or for the bad is a robot, and a robot is dumb. It's smart, it repeats itself. It's a smart, dumb machine. So it's predictably dumb. And therefore, we have a role called a business analyst, someone who gathers requirements. Sometimes it's referred to as a product owner who fills that role. And essentially, that person's job is to take information, whether it's from a person, from some documentation, or sometimes it's even from just observing how things are done, and documenting that information in a way that developers can create a program and create a computer system of that. So a business analyst is typically somebody that is very detail oriented and also very repetitive. So proper requirements or user stories, as they're known, are going to be very detailed. In today's agile world, if you're familiar at all with that terminology, sometimes some agencies or some teams have kind of forgotten and look at requirement gathering, or a a business requirement document, which certainly there are certainly some old-fashioned ways of doing it, but some newer kind of modern teams kind of look at that entire uh, process as kind of, that's not the cool thing, that's not the modern way to do it. And essentially, what the result is that they just jump straight to building before really properly communicating what it is that needs to be built. And as you can imagine, the result is usually not what the initial intention was for that software to be. So, of course, the process. This is really step one. It's step one in 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 the life cycle of building software. And again, just like building software never ends, the process of creating, documenting, and refining process never ends. It's something that's constantly iterated upon and improved. Now let's talk about the love-hate relationship with automation. So essentially, what we're talking about are the benefits, but also drawbacks that come with automation. So this is something that's worth looking at. And maybe a company of one or two people, the hate will be a lot stronger than the love. But any scalable or scaling company that has a lot of growth in mind will usually take the love over the hate with automation. So repetition is a blessing with a slight curse. So the blessing of repetition, or the good thing of repetition, the love of repetition, is that it's predictable, right? You know that it will do the same exact thing again, again, and again, no matter what. So 1 + 1 in a calculator will always be 2, and that's what makes a calculator good. If a calculator got tired after 20 presses, then it wouldn't be a calculator. It would just be a smart math person. Now, the slight curse of automation is that it also does, there's no context. And now I'm saying this in a very dumbed down way. Of course, there are ways of making computers intelligent, but at its core, even intelligent computers have no context. They just have a lot of information. But a computer, by definition, cannot is not is a computer, and it doesn't reach any sort of conclusion on its own. The only conclusion it can make is one that you've told it to, including the ability to make conclusions. So what's important to think about when we're talking about process and automation is that everything will need to fit into this box. And where, the idea of errors, for example, that comes in from not thinking of every possible scenario that happens. And then an error will occur, or a bug is then introduced, that rare bug that no one understands. It's been 3 months and all of a sudden something's wrong. Well, that's the that's the software getting input or getting information that it does not expect. And when that happens, the computer doesn't know how to react. So essentially, a computer needs to be told, or a program needs to be told, a system, an app, they all need to be told exactly how to handle every single situation. And this is why automation is so important. And it's important to think about every possible scenario. And one will never think of every possible scenario. And hence, that's why we all know that there's always bugs discovered in applications, no matter how big. No, and on the contrary, the bigger they are, the more prone they are to bugs. The key to is creating a level of automation that you can conform to. This is a very, very important point that people many times neglect to realize. So creating automation by definition means that there's going to have to be some level of process and people conforming to that level, to that automation. So many times you'll have a small mom and pop that is willing to go out of their way, quote unquote, to make you happy, versus a corporation where you have a manager in Walmart who really gets what you're saying and wishes they can refund you, but for some reason this item says no refunds, and their little key there does not allow them to do the refund. So that's a choice that a company like Walmart has to make when they're thinking about their company at a large scale, because they can't afford to allow managers to make decisions above a certain threshold that they determine. So um, essentially, when one reaches the point where they're ready for process and automation, the key is to identifying what is the optimal balance of process following automation following your process. And then at the same time, we're going to say, well, here is where we're going to create this rule, and the things are going to have to operate and fall within these parameters in order for the things to function. So that's an important thing that sometimes people don't realize. And creating a process that is too restrictive, of course, does not work and can create a bottleneck in an organization. But in a similar manner, creating a process that where the goal is to be too encompassing is also not good. And it's very common to see this in kind of your perfectionist business owners, which is a very common trait, where the goal is to make sure that the system handles every single possible scenario. Where really, if you think about it, and you were to think of it in an objective way, and you'd say, well, do I want the software in 2 weeks, conforming to 95% of my cases, and the other five will have to be handled at least temporarily as an exception? Or do I want to deal with each one of those 5%, which ends up translating into 3 times the amount of time and cost, and then I finally get that 100%. And then when I think I have the 100% coverage, all of a sudden there's another case. So I still don't have 100% coverage. So that's kind of the idea that we're talking about here. Um, this is kind of just a different way of saying the same thing. So it's okay to change process for the sake of automation and scalability. So not only is it important to conform to a certain level of automation, but it's also okay to make a change in process. So a total change in process when thinking about the concept of scalability. So many times one will find that you have your existing process. Okay, we will make our process a lot more definitive so that we can conform to it, so that a computer system can then replicate it. But it's also important to think of your process in kind of a futuristic way. So looking at your process and thinking about things like scalability, and thinking about things like future growth, and then perhaps the conclusion would be to make some changes in the process that maybe kind of require certain things to take a hit today, whether it's retraining, hiring more people, changing systems, throwing out some equipment, changing a website. But if you really believe that your company is scaling the way it is, and it does make sense and one can see that this process in the long term needs to be changed in order to properly scale, then that can be a very wise decision, especially when we're getting ready to build a custom system. Because when you build a custom system, whatever you're creating there, if there's a need to then change it later, of course, whatever was previously built is then not reusable. Here's a really, really, really important point. Your frontline team members are great to consult and validate assumptions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people come in here um, and kind of tell me all about their great idea and how they want to build it, and how they know exactly what happens in their business. And it's not that they're not operations driven or focused, but no matter if you're a manager, even if you are a detail oriented manager, there's still a huge difference between the way a manager looks at any given operation and the way the frontline team members that actually provide the product or service do. And when we're talking about a software that will now go and automate or create a process out of that interaction that's occurring on that front line, excluding the frontline team members usually results in feedback that comes way later once a product is released and then used by them. And then usually you'll have the leader not wanting to admit that this huge aspect of the software should have been done differently, will then force everyone to change the way they're doing things to this illusionary way that the manager perceived operations to be, and then the business takes a hit. So it's very important to involve frontline team members right from the beginning. Many times when our BA is working with a company, they'll talk after some initial conversations. They'll go straight and sit side by side at the desk with someone who's actually doing whatever the system is now going to do. Observe them, talk to them, and make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what the system is supposed to do. Changes to your automation should be done seldomly. So it's very important that when a process is introduced, that it's not changed too frequently. So there's usually two very extreme cases as to why this could occur. On the one hand, it's very possible that automation and process was created without really giving thought to scalability, right? And that's kind of the third point here where we said it's okay to change a process for the sake of scalability. So when that doesn't occur, then that short-sighted process then becomes old, becomes antique. It doesn't work anymore. It's breaking. It's turning. Now there's a bottleneck. Now it's not working. Now we're rejecting customers. We can't serve customers. Orders are getting lost. We don't know what to do. And then then number one, what ends up happening is then there's all of a sudden an emergency. Please change this quickly. And whenever you got to do something very quickly in software, especially when it's something that ties into something that's mission critical for the company, that's never good. Software that's built quickly is the equivalent of building a house quickly. If you build a house, if you have to build your house quickly and you got to build your building quickly and you don't have the time to properly um, account for every single aspect of it, there's going to be repercussions from that. So changing automation because changing automation too quickly is therefore a very, very bad idea. So the key over here in that scenario is to make sure that we're thinking of the future when we're creating that automation. Now on the other side, what we can have is we can have automation that is thoroughly that is thoroughly planned and thought through. And every single aspect of this automation is built and designed and architected to cover every single possible scenario, hence your perfectionist personality there. And then what ends up happening is the second there is a slight change, so out of our 5,000 customers, one customer happened to want this item in blue, and our system's only designed to do it in black, and all of a sudden we have this request like, hey, we got to rewrite the whole system because we got to accommodate the blue one. Well, that's your opposite extreme. That's someone who's thinking things so far out, and they don't have that kind of balance to say, well, there's going to be some conforming. So if we look at the second point there, there's the key of creating a level of automation that you can conform to. So really, it's very important when we look at automation to look at it with a balance. It requires a certain level of judgment of when to say, well, that's too much of a unicorn scenario, versus no, that scenario is very common and needs to be addressed, as well as here's a scenario that I can foresee happening in a year, and therefore I want to address it now so that we don't have that issue. So those are all things that if you work with a good team, you don't need to be operations driven or process driven or automation driven. It's just important to be aware of these things so that when you're talking to someone that's getting that information from you, that you can then identify whether or not they have this level of balance and are able to help define what that automation ultimately is. Now let's talk about something else. So there's this assumption that we have over here, which is that we're building custom software. Well, who says that? Building a custom system is a huge undertaking. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's a big deal. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. It's 2017 right now, and there are plenty of systems. As a matter of fact, there are more CRMs than there ever been, obviously, and we haven't even seen them yet. I mean, there are so many CRMs. Of course, there are the kind of dominant ones that are dominant in the market, but every once in a while I see one or two new ones that are really kind of powerful and actually have a unique market for them. So the goal here is not to provide an entire review of CRMs. Perhaps that's something we can do in another video if there's interest for that. The goal is going to be to look at how to decide whether or not any given CRM is the right approach versus building a custom system. So let's explore that. So the first question is, there are so many CRMs out there, so why the need for custom, right? So that's a question actually that you got to ask yourself. Why do I need to build custom software? If the answer is, well, oh, there are so many CRMs, I didn't even know that. I just went straight to a software company or to my friend who develops apps and asked them about it because I need software, so I need them to build software. Well, that probably doesn't make much sense. Of course, the first thing that you got to do is your homework, and the first level of homework is what's already there. And as we'll discuss in a little bit, if if you do have the ability to use something that's out there and it solves your need, of course, that is by far a much better solution than building software. So that's a first question that many times is skipped, and I see that many times in startups too, where same thing, no homework. Hey, I have this great idea. What if I can create an app where people go into the app and they put their credit card in there first, and then whenever they need a ride, they just press a button and boom, there's a driver there. Well, did you hear of the app called Uber? It's been around for a couple of years. Oh, let me go look at that. You have no idea how many times that happens on a smaller scale. So that same thing that is more commonly seen in I have a great idea type conversations is also very common when we're talking about building custom systems for second, third stage growth companies that need systems. You'd be surprised how unaware or uneducated, no homework done, how people can approach a company and just say, hey, we want to build this. And if the company doesn't really care, and trust me, I've seen a handful of these cases where people sit there and they start building stuff, and all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, wow, this thing exists in its entirety, and I just feel so sorry for you. And I've actually know a personal case of someone who has this beautiful CRM that I've looked at, and I'm like, I know a system called insert name of 50 CRMs here that does exactly what you do there in a better way, cheaper, faster, and so on. So here's really the kind of key question that it boils down to when deciding whether or not to go with a custom software system. Is my company value proposition tied to something that should say unique in my operations? So essentially the question is there a unique way of operating that creates my value proposition? And that's a very, very important question. And the answer is not only is it not always yes, it's usually no. So, for example, if I'm selling a new product on the market and I have a bunch of retail stores and all we do is we sell this unique product, maybe it's that couch that I saw the other day where you throw it into the wind and it's this little piece of material that costs $2 for them to produce probably, and you hold it in the wind, you tie it, and all of a sudden you have a sofa and a bed and all sorts of interesting things, and they made it for $2 and they sell it for 100 and everyone's happy. So in that case, your value proposition has nothing to do with your operations. You're going to have typical supply chain management. You are going to operate exactly as every other manufacturer or direct to consumer uh, manufacturing company does. There's nothing unique there. Let me tell you something. You do not need a CRM for that. I'm sorry, you do not need a custom system for that. There are plenty of existing CRMs or inventory management systems, and depending on your level, there's enterprise grade stuff, but there's plenty of things there that are built for your operation, and there's absolutely no need to go custom. So the real question is my value proposition, is what makes my company unique. Is that something that has to do with my operations, with the way I execute, with the way we do things internally, with the way that one leads to two, leads to three, leads to four? If the answer is yes, and and the next question is, do you want to scale? Do you want to grow? Do you want to rapidly grow? If the answer is yes, hopefully, the answer is always yes. Hopefully, it's the second question. But if the answer is yes, and there is something very unique in your operations that creates your value, so if you don't have your value propositions laid out, then it's time to do that. But once they're laid out, it's usually not many. It can be one, two, or three. If there's something there that's tied to a unique way of doing things, then an existing CRM may or may not be the right solution. And here's a number I just threw out here. I kind of made it up, but I kind of know it's right to a degree. So for $1,200 a year worth of subscription cost, that's about $100 a month, you're getting at least $12 million worth of software. So every piece of software that I know that will charge per seat per user $100, they've invested well over, I'll say, $12 million worth of software, and that's something that people really take for granted and don't realize when you're dealing with building custom systems. Of course, there's always the sticker shock, like, okay, how long does it take to build this thing? Oh wait, it's $1 million and takes forever. Well, how can that be? Well, a great way to understand that is by then saying, okay, well, what do you know? What do you regard as kind of the proper system or system that you would compare to? Now, once you name some system out there, let's do some research and let's see how many developers they've hired over how long and so on, and calculate the amount of money they've put into building that system. Now, there is absolutely no question that when something is built for someone specifically, for a company, for an organization, the cost is less because you probably don't have to be dealing with many different features for a wide subset of clients and so on. There's no question that there's all sorts of other factors, and I'm not saying that that software will cost $12 million to build. What I am saying is that um, there is a huge amount of uh, the power of being able to go onto a website and signing up for a software system and pay them tens or hundreds per month is a blessing that you should not take for granted. The ability to get $12 million worth of stuff, and the definition of worth is what it would cost you to make for yourself. For what is that 0.000 whatever percent of that cost is should not be forgotten, and you should not undervalue the power of using an existing system if it's possible. Now, saying no is the secret to great products. So this is something that's interesting. Many people don't realize this. What creates a really good software system in any way, shape, or form is their ability to is the fact that the company and the product ownership, the ones that are in charge of what the software does, are saying no to requests way more often than they're saying yes. So what that means is the company has a very specific vision of what their product is and what it's going to be, and they never deviate from that. And that's what creates a good piece of software. An example of that will be the company Atlassian. They make they make systems which are used mainly by software companies, but not only. Jira, Bitbucket, Confluence, Bamboo. Well, there's tons of systems that Atlassian makes. They're a huge company. I believe they might be public now. I think they were acquired, or they're either acquired or public. And one thing that always astonished me was there were some really core things that I needed as a software company, and that I knew so many people needed based on the online forum and based on public questions and public feedback that everyone can see. And I was always amazed to see how their product team would respond that, while we understand that this is something that you guys really want, it doesn't fall in line with what we're trying to do because of A, B, C, whatever the reasons are, insert reason here, it doesn't matter. Therefore, we're not going to do it. Here's some workarounds, here's what someone else posted, and then in the comments, of course, you have a bunch of intelligent people and people figure out how to get stuff done. Of course, there's always more than one solution to a problem. But being able to say no is the secret to a great product. But now let's think about that from your perspective. Well, from my perspective, if you're not building custom software for me, right? I'm not paying you 1,200 a year so that your $12 million operation should do exactly what I asked them to. Well, if there's something that in my operation that's truly unique, is your system going to be able to work with that? So essentially the question is, are you a unicorn, right? Is there something unicornish in your operations? Is there something not only of unicorn fashion in your operations, but is that your value? Is what is the thing that creates your company and that makes it great? Is it because you do things differently? Well, if you do things differently, then the chances that an existing system are not going to fulfill that need are a lot higher. Existing CRMs make sense when used to keep score, not create it. Here's another way of saying what I've said before, which might resonate better. Existing CRMs, their job by definition is to keep count and to record stuff that's happening outside of them. They don't usually do a lot of processing or a lot of decision or a lot of stuff outside of just keeping track of stuff that happens. Now, a good CRM doesn't involve you inputting the score or the data into the system. Maybe it has some ways of capturing it, whether it's an online lead form or it's scanning your emails or it's syncing with some other system. Great. It's still keeping score. It's keeping a record of stuff that happens outside of it. Software that actually creates the score, so that software that actually creates part of the process, that actually has an intrinsic uh, value to it in terms of your complete process, that is probably something that a CRM is not going to help you with. So, for example, Uber. Uber is not a company they're not a taxi company that happens to have some systems. No, they're a taxi company where their entire value proposition, their entire operation is based on their system, based on their software system. Take the software away from Uber and it's dead, right? So of course over there it's their core value proposition is the ability to use system software And that's really their only value proposition. Every single taxi company in some way involves you either picking up the phone and calling them or hailing down a cab. And Uber allows you to use software for it. So if you look at the second question, is my company value proposition tied to something unique in my operations? The answer is, of course, yes, it is. And therefore, their CRM or their software is used by no means to keep score, but it's used to create the score. On the other hand, if I'm a taxi company and I take my cab requests on the street, by phone, online, there are certainly CRMs, or CRM is probably not the right term, but there's certainly software systems that are built specifically for those taxi companies and allow those taxi companies to function. And there's most likely not a case, unless there's something else in the equation, but just with that information alone, the conclusion would most likely be use an existing system. Don't build the next Uber. So that's a really important distinction here, which I hope is clear. And if this question is properly contemplated and you really think about it, that's almost certain. That's almost always going to be lead to the direct conclusion of whether or not custom software is needed. Now we're going to talk about something that's a little bit different. There is a hybrid approach. So it doesn't have to be one way or another necessarily. There could be a case can be made, and there are certain scenarios, and I would say this is probably not as often as one would think, but there are certain scenarios where you can kind of combine the two. So let's explore that. Let's ask ourselves one important question. So if we came to the conclusion, we said, yes, there is a part of my operation that really is a part of a part of my unique operation is my value proposition, and therefore I need something that actually works with that value proposition well. Is it just one aspect? And I say here as a kind of a rule of thumb, is it less than 20 or 25% of my operation that is unique? So maybe I send out flowers just like all other companies. And the only difference is that my flowers are really fresh. And the way we get them really fresh is that we're always monitoring the conditions of the flowers. Or maybe we have a handwritten note inside and everyone else is printing their notes or whatever it is. So if there's really a part of your operation, and I don't even know if those are good examples because those sound like a different product with the same operation, but maybe they're not. Maybe I got to handwrite the note, so I guess that is part of the process to a degree. But if there's an existing CRM that deals with gift baskets, and the only change that I'm making is that I need to make sure every note is handwritten, that it's tracked, and so on, it probably there probably is a way to use something that's there and then only add or customize the parts that I need. And the reason why it's worth exploring this question, unless the answer, if you're Uber, then you don't even have to think about the hybrid because there's no way that it works. There's nothing that Uber can use that's already out there that they can combine with some unique custom system. However, if the answer is somewhere in the middle and there's there is a big chunk of what you're doing that is repetitive and is similar to your competition, then the hybrid approach is one worth exploring. So what we're talking about is option of using a CRM that has a solid API and building on top of it. The API is application programming interface, I think. Application programming interface. I think that's what it is. Um, and essentially, what an API means is it's a way for your system. So the system that you're using, let it be Salesforce or Google or even Facebook and Twitter. It's a way for another system to get information from, in this case, your CRM programmatically, automatically, right? Not manually, not by clicking and exporting a CSV and then re-importing it into a system, right? That doesn't sound like something that scales. The power of an API, especially the modern REST APIs, is that they scale very, very well. And then if a CRM, which every reputable, large, successful CRM will have one of these APIs, and of course, there's different levels of how much they expose or how much they allow you to do with the API, which is, of course, an important question if one is exploring this route. But the idea of then having a separate application that only handles the unique part of the business, and then you rely for the rest of it on the CRM, that is something worth exploring. Of course, if 90% of what I do happens in an existing CRM and only 10% happens in a custom system, of course, my cost, time, and so on is so much less. Now, some of the drawbacks are that you're 100% dependent in order for this system to work on that software, on that CRM, right? Changing CRMs most likely involves a large amount of work in terms of connecting to that new CRM that you want to switch to. It's most likely not trivial. We also now are working with two different systems, and working with two systems is now, by definition, a slowdown, right? Even if each system is the system of record for its given task, which of course has to be the case, right? There's no way that our custom system is the system of record, but the CRM is also the system of record for the same piece of information. That just can't be. So of course you need to have one place which serves as your source of truth, and then the other one feeds off that information. But even with that, you still have a limit of customization. So just because the CRM that I found has an open API and I'm able to grab information from it and also send information back and update information in my CRM with my new custom application, there's also going to be limitations because think of that API as kind of the door. So in my house, if I want to go and bring some stuff in the door, sure, I got to make sure that I have the key to the door and I can open the door and bring things in. What's if I come with something that's just too big for the door? It's an odd size. What's if I don't have the key? Or what if the item that I'm trying to bring in has a strong smell and the rule in the house is you can't bring it in? So there's limitations because you're still 100% dependent on what that CRM allows both to enter it and also what it's willing to provide. Salesforce is kind of a great example of, I mean, it's obviously the largest CRM out there, but I bring it here as an example to the whole concept of kind of the hybrid approach because Salesforce is something that started off as a CRM and then evolved into something that has an entire marketplace of so many pre-built extensions. So another way of looking at it, of looking at this is kind of an extension of Salesforce. What makes Salesforce powerful is that these extensions can operate within the CRM as opposed to building a separate system. To the point that the CRM, that Salesforce, there are Salesforce developers, and we've done some Salesforce work in the past. And you're essentially what you're able to do with Salesforce is you're able to customize and build on top of stuff that you see inside of the CRM, and you can change the look and feel and change the way things operate. But at the end of the day, it's still not a custom system, right? You're still limited to the customization that Salesforce allows you to have. So a case can be made for the hybrid approach if there's only a portion of your operation that's unique and part of your value proposition. Now let's talk about the best bang for your buck. So if we've already kind of come to the conclusion that, if the CRM is a great option and that's the conclusion you've come to, that's great. And if there's interest, we can do kind of a review and go through the CRMs because that is certainly, there's a lot to navigate. There are so many CRMs in 2017 and it's only growing. And there are a lot of good ones. And the decision for one versus the other is a tough one. And let me tell you something, searching like top CRMs or CRM reviews is loaded with so many SEO heavy bullshit sites that it's very difficult to really understand the benefits and kind of compare CRMs to each other unless you've actually used them and experienced them. So it's certainly a very challenging thing. So if that was the conclusion, that's great. If the conclusion was to use a hybrid approach, that's great. If the conclusion was, and that's, I'm assuming if you're watching this video, most likely your conclusion that you do need a custom system because you've already done some homework. Let's talk about, and I don't mean literally the best bang for your buck, but let's talk about the best practices. Let's talk about the best way to do it. Okay. There's an exception kind of to everything I said here. So large enterprises, typically public companies, tend to build their own stuff for many reasons, right? So Subway, even though that when they sell a sandwich is exactly the same process, or it seems to be the same process as when Burger King sells a sandwich, and theoretically their POS and their online ordering and their drive-through all should be able to share the same system. There's a reason why they typically don't. Uh, One part does have to do with their operations, and maybe their operation is so different, and their their size is so large that there's the same amount of developers that it takes for Subway to build their own POS, and that's point of sale system. That's their register, their digital register. So the same amount of developers. I'm going to generalize here, but it's more or less the same resources that's needed to create a point of sale system for just Subway or one that's shared by a million companies. So if your operation is large enough and the amount of stores you have are large enough, then the justification and sometimes most likely even a money saving decision will be to build your own. That's most likely not the case that you are facing right now in your own business. But let's think about let's just kind of leave that out there, and that's going to be relevant soon. Now, for growth companies, it is those with an innovative process at the core of their operations. And that's essentially what we said before in a different, more direct way. So if at the core of your operation there's some innovation, there's an invention, there's a different way of doing the something old. I have a better way of doing something, then that's where custom software comes in. ROI needs to be there when creating a lifetime of dependency on building and maintaining. So this is something that's very important. It's a very crucial decision. It's perhaps one of the biggest decisions a company can make is whether or not they're going to go the path of creating their own software, creating their own systems. You are essentially you're signing a contract that is way longer than you can imagine because you have a lifetime of dependency on both building and maintaining. So the ROI needs to be there, right? And that's why we say it has to be an innovative process that's at the core of your operations. So in order for the ROI to be there, um, the your operation needs to be unique in such a way that the system now powers your operation and allows you to scale at such a great pace that the software makes sense and that there's a good ROI. And that is the reason why a large enterprise, even though they don't have any sort of innovative process at serving sandwiches, can still justify it building their own software. And that is because of their unique kind of scale of economics and the way their costs and operations work, they get an ROI that at by building customized things for parts that are a lot smaller and a lot more trivial. Another thing that's important to know is that eventually you'll have to hire an internal team, or at least be prepared to do so. So sometimes you might be watching this and you're right now contemplating the decision of whether or not you're going to use existing systems, or you're going to have your CTO, or you're going to hire a CTO and then build your own team. That's great. If you're not and you're looking at working with someone outside of your organization, be prepared that you're eventually going to have a department within your organization that are technical, and you have a bunch of developers working for you. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. Um, and I say at least be prepared to do so because there are certain ways of really there are some unique unicorns, right, that have an innovative process at the core of their operations that do scale with companies. Very rare for software teams to be able to do this, but there is such a case. But in your head, be ready that you might have to actually bring this, in house. Now let's talk about how to scale with custom built software. So we've already decided that we're building it, we've already built it, and now we're running with it. Here are some tips. So you're probably a little bit, you know, maybe some time away from that, but let's just kind of talk about some general guidelines and some vision type stuff about how to do it. Number one, constant feedback from team members. So you kind of mentioned this about the frontline team members. It's always important to get feedback from people, have a systemized way of collecting that, being able to quantify it, being able to see, is this a unique case, or is this something that's recurring every single day and we're just not capturing it, and using that information to be able to tweak and enhance and improve your software. Number two is work in an agile environment. This obviously is not the time to totally discuss all the intricacies and all the details of agile and kind of the different ways of doing things. Um, but if it's something that you're not familiar with, it's worth researching. If it's something you are familiar with, it's still worth researching because there's a wealth of information behind the concept of doing things in an agile fashion, right? But the underlying concept is if you're ready to be an innovative company. Any company that has software at its core at any level is an innovative company. Every innovative company, by definition, is agile. They move quickly. They make quick decisions. They're able to bend and be flexible with the needs of the market and respond to the needs of the market in a very quick and rapid pace. So it's important to have that mentality and to think whether or not my company culture or my company mentality matches that format of working and change management. Don't look for perfection. It doesn't exist. It's so common to kind of want your app to be perfect, want your software to be perfect, your CRM has got to be perfect. Software, as we explained, it's a robot. A robot by definition is not perfect. So don't look for perfection. Don't try to have a system. And your goal should never be a system that has no bugs. Facebook has bugs. Google has bugs. They all have bugs, and it's okay, right? So if you're a perfectionist, then that's okay. Just be imperfect about your perfections and just let all that out elsewhere. But maybe look at how perfect the problem is. I don't know. We got to figure out how to handle that. There's probably someone better to talk to than me about that. Another very important thing, establish a product owner. Have someone that's in charge, and this is very important for companies. Many times you kind of meet with the team that's going to build the software, you discuss stuff, and then you're now the point of contact. If you're the visionary type, it's definitely not you. If you're the type that you see your whole company and you're high level and you're usually late to meetings and your emails are all every sentence starts lowercase and there's punctuation missing and you usually walk around untucked, but half of your shirt is tucked in, you probably are not the product owner because a product owner is someone who's detail oriented, who listens, who sees details, who's able to pick up on things like that. That's okay. Just make sure that you can designate someone within your organization as a decision maker and don't override them. They need to be able to be the product owner. They need to be able to collectively take feedback and then send requirements and give instructions to a development team and also hear feedback back from a development team. Because if there's not one point of contact and that point of contact is not someone that has the skills of a product owner, which is something we can talk about at another time, that's probably a recipe for disaster. Leverage the fact that you have a custom system. This is super important. You've already invested in a custom system. Leverage that. Have a vendor portal or a client portal. Have automated emails. Brag and boost and improve your speed of response. You have a custom system. You've made this investment. You've created a system. You have this edge on your competition. Think about every single possible edge that you can now infer and create as an extension of the fact that you have a custom system and use it. You know how powerful it is when a customer or vendor, depending on who your customer base is able to log into a portal and see up to date information? What kind of transparency and trust that creates when automated emails come and update you about every step of the process of something, and the person doesn't feel lost. How many phone calls to customer service you avoid? The speed when someone can know that you can do something 3 times quicker than the others because you're using your software properly. Leverage the power, and sometimes there's only small things you got to do in the software that then creates a reaping amount of value for your customers. So think about that part. Like most things in life, it's the little things that matter most. So the hard work of a piece of software, here's kind of my rule. It's a 91-9 rule, something like that. I don't know. 91% of what's done is not seen. It's a 9% of what it takes to develop that is 100% of what's perceived. So all the major work that developers are doing, your end users, your employees, your customers will never see. They'll never appreciate. They won't even notice a difference. The only thing that they notice are those final little bits and pieces. It's just like a house, you know. You don't appreciate the foundation of your house. You don't appreciate the piping, the wiring, all that. You appreciate the layer of paint that's on the very external of your house. Yet, that's important. So using that analogy, many times there's so much focus. This is more of a development team problem, but it also relates to you as the customer or the product owner. You're so focused, spending all this time and money on building the house, that by the time you're done and it's time to, paint that wall a nice color, either you have no budget or you don't even care about it because you just want to be able to move in already, and you move into a house that's kind of like, raw, and it's really only 9% missing from it. It's 91% complete. So don't forget about that extra 9%. That could be features, little features that end up making all the difference, that end up saving employees tons of times. The UX, the user experience, that's what that sounds for. Like, let's not forget, let's have the application look nice. That goes such a far way both for employees and for external clients. So let's not forget about that. The end. Good luck with your journey. You've obviously come here because you're on a journey and you're looking for ways to um, you're considering developing software. So good luck with it. It is a process that is complex, and I hope that I was able to share some insight and make this process a little bit less taboo. Being first is definitely key. So never forget about the speed in software. There's not that much that is patentable when compared to other industries. So being able to be first to market and just running with something is very important. Iterate when needed. We spoke about being agile, so make sure you're constantly changing and updating and doing responding to your market's needs. And email me if you have any questions. My name is Levi Pruss. My email is Levi, Levi at Yzag. You see in the top right corner, yzag.com. Any questions at all, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer and share whatever insight. Good luck and have a great one. And I hope to follow up with some additional videos that provide insight into the idea of software and to make this information more accessible to the public.